Hello everyone. It's been quite a while since I have done anything pre-recorded. I wanted to talk a bit about the recently officially announced Switch 2 remake for Ocarina of Time. I've talked about this still in some Ocarina of Time randomizer streams, but wanted to put out a standalone video. If you are not familiar with Zelda Ocarina of Time, don't worry, I'm just gonna have footage from early on in the game in the background, so there's no spoilers here. I might have a few images up to show what I'm talking about here and there, but this video can be fully enjoyed in an audio format. I'm not going to be speculating on what studio or team is making the game here. Instead, I want to talk about what we can reasonably expect to see, and more importantly, what I and other fans want out of an Ocarina of Time remake. For those unfamiliar, this game is widely considered one of the best video games of all time, both in terms of critical reception and the broader gaming community. It's one of those things where even people who are not fans of the adventure game genre recognize its quality, even if it's not their kind of thing. The game is old, it shows its age, and later games would top it in terms of presentation, story, and character writing. In my eyes, what makes Ocarina of Time a masterpiece is its pacing and consistency. While other games in the Zelda series would have some higher highs, there really aren't any parts of this game that I dread doing replays. There isn't any fat or padding to trim with this game, so where should a remake improve? Let's talk of the obvious being the visuals. The little snippet of footage we got during the June Direct did not give us much to go on regarding what the visual direction is that they're going to go with for this. The deku tree in the tapestry looks very different from the deku tree we see in the original game, but we are looking at an artistic interpretation of what the deku tree in this game looks like, so it may not reflect how it appears in game. Ocarina of Time Young Link has a new design, very different from what we have seen from other modern interpretations of the character, such as Ocarina of Time 3D, Hyrule Warriors, and Super Smash Bros. Ultimate. It's an overall more detailed and realistic design, but still has some stylization. Beyond that, it's really difficult to judge anything about this game's design or the game's visuals at large. I'm not exactly in love with the design right off the bat, but until we see Link in motion, I don't really have any strong feelings about it. I didn't really like DK's new design in the Bonanza reveal either, but once I got my hands on that game and how so expressive he was, I fell in love with it. So I don't think it's really fair to pass judgment on whether I like this design or not. I do expect there to be significant overhauls to the world and environments themselves. Being a Nintendo 64 game, geometry in every area is very simple. Some areas, such as Castletown, use 2D backgrounds. The 3DS remaster did some work in these areas, replacing these backgrounds with 3D models and adding extra layers and steps to the cliffs around Hyrule Field. I fully expect that we won't see any 2D backgrounds here, and that objects such as bombs, which are previously represented with 2D sprites, will now be modeled. I think we can reasonably expect that there will be greater liberties taken than the 3DS version, with more areas being expanded upon, such as the Lost Woods, which feels less like being in a dense forest at times and more like segmented rooms with trees on top of the side of the rooms. I do hope that they keep the fog, which covers some areas such as Kokiri Forest. While, of course, this was initially implemented to hide limitations of the system, it does affect the mood in the area. And regarding lighting, this is one of the things that the 3DS remake did not handle as well as the original release that can be improved upon here. There's actually a lot of interesting lighting tricks used in Ocarina of Time that often go unnoticed and unappreciated. There are a lot of sequences where lights will dim to emphasize certain effects or highlight things. Whenever you speak with Navi, the game will darken everything else besides the fairy, Link, and his immediate surroundings. Dim lighting is also used in some dungeons to build atmosphere, put the player more on edge, and mask some of the low resolution textures of the original. The 3DS remaster infamously overbrightened a lot of these areas, and it ruined some effects. I expect that similar to Star Fox, which looks to be a visual showcase for Switch 2, Nintendo's gonna really push that visual fidelity and take full advantage of the HDR range to make the game pop. I just really hope this does not come at the expense of some scenes being overbrightened. There's one more thing I want to touch on when it comes to visual presentation. In case you're not aware, the original release of Ocarina of Time had a whole bunch of blood in it. There's traces of blood that can be seen on the floor in some of the later dungeons, which were said to be the site of executions and whatnot. Ganondorf is seen vomiting blood after being injured during your confrontation with him later in the game. His blood was changed from red to green in the 1.2 version of the game, and the 3DS remaster changed bloodstains on the ground to be darker, more ambiguous. While myself and a lot of other fans who would like for these elements to be reverted, I don't think it's reasonable to expect that. In fact, I think the scene of Ganondorf vomiting will probably be removed completely. They won't have him cough up blood, and it wouldn't really make sense for them to be coughing up green blood. The only reason why that scene was in the game is because it was an alternate version of the scene they wanted to remove, but they couldn't realistically reanimate that whole cutscene. I do hope they at least keep the suggestion of dried blood as they did in the 3DS release. Not having that would seriously alter the tone of these areas. On a similar note, later versions of Ocarina of Time replaced the symbols associated with the Gerudo with a new symbol. I guarantee that the old symbol will not return, not just because it had a resemblance to real-world religious iconography, but because the new symbol has been used for the past 2.5 decades. It would be kind of weird and inconsistent with the lore of the broader series to revert that now. While we are on the topic of tone, let's talk about the music. Zelda remakes and remasters have been inconsistent in this area. Ocarina of Time 3D kept the soundtrack very faithful to the original, using the same MIDI style audio with only one new orchestrated song added to the credit sequence. Wind Waker HD went further with this, recreating the soundtrack with much higher quality MIDI instruments and additional instruments in some aid to give the music a much fuller feeling. Meanwhile, Twilight Princess and Skyward Sword HD did not change the soundtracks at all. Link's Awakening for Switch went the furthest, with the game receiving a fully orchestrated soundtrack. Ideally, I would like for an orchestrated soundtrack with a toggle to choose between the two, but Nintendo is definitely allergic to offering that kind of option. In absence of that obvious best case scenario that we should expect as of standard, I do feel they will probably go with an orchestrated soundtrack, seeing that's how they approached the Star Fox remake. I do hope they keep the sound samples that they used from the sample discs when creating the original. There was a song in the 1.0 and 1.1 revision of the game that was changed in later releases, that of course being the Fire Temple. This song used a sound sample. This was specifically track 76 from the Best Service Voice Spectral Volume 1 sample disc, and consisted of a vocal chant that would add layers to that theme. However, that chant itself is a resuscitation of the Quran. From 1.2 onwards in all future releases, that song was replaced with an alternative version. Well, a lot of people point to that as censorship and want to see that changed back. I think it's a disingenuous argument. Koji Kondo simply did not realize the meaning of the vocals, and that name of the track really offered no clues that it could have religious significance. Nintendo itself has a policy against including any real-world religious iconography or material, so I don't think it would have been chosen had its meaning been known at the time. Although I agree with most people that the original song is more pleasing, its existence was due to basically a slip through the cracks there. In fact, this evidence suggests that Nintendo caught that issue prior to or immediately after release, but by then the process of creating cartridges had already begun, so that's why we didn't see that fixed until the 1.2 revision. Beyond that, I think it really breaks the immersion for a lot of people. Like, just imagine exploring a volcanic temple and hearing a chopped up excerpt of a sermon from your language and religion. There's no way that version of the song is coming back. Now, let's get into some gameplay changes. There are 3 things I fully expect to be here and will be very disappointed in if they are not. First, the boots being changed from the equipment screen to the item menu. I said at the outset that the pacing of Ocarina of Time is great, but the water temple is somewhat infamous for being a slog. The temple itself really is not the problem, it's the item boots. You have to equip and unequip these frequently to sink or swim, but because the boots are in the equip menu, you can't assign them to a button like other items and have to constantly pause the game and scroll through the menu. ROM hacks, fan mods, and decompilations have made them equipable items for decades, and Ocarina of Time 3D also made that change. Every Zelda game with iron boots since this game has done the same. Second gameplay change is including Master Quest. Master Quest was added in the GameCube release and returned in Ocarina of Time 3D. It's the same game, but the dungeons have been altered significantly. Puzzles are different, locations of keys and items are changed, and enemies have been rearranged, leading to some harder enemies appearing earlier than normal. The 3DS remaster included this game mode as well, but also mirrored the entire game and applied a double damage modifier. It's not my preferred way to play the game. I think the changes to dungeons are for the worse in many cases, but it is worth a try once you're more familiar with the game. The third gameplay change I would want to see brought over is gyro aiming. 3D Zelda games have had gyro aiming as a feature for 2 decades now, and are a great option to have. This is another feature that Ocarina of Time 3D implemented as well, so I want to see that here. There are 2 gameplay changes that Ocarina of Time 3D made that I'm not sure if they'll bring back, and I'm also don't think I'd be upset if they didn't. Those being the boss challenges and Sheikah Stones. Boss challenges were accessible via interacting with Link's bed and let you rematch bosses. There was nothing changed about the bosses beyond the fact that items available to you are restricted and that your time would be recorded. The Sheikah Stones were very controversial at the time. These bouncing glowing rocks were added next to Link's house and within the Temple of Time. Crawling inside will give the player video snippets that provide hints for where collectibles are, as well as clues to solve puzzles. It's as if searching on YouTube for location of a solution was integrated directly within the game itself. Personally, I don't think this really hurts the game at all, but if you don't need or want hints, you never have to interact with these. The big issue with them is that one is located in the Temple of Time itself and just really clashes with the aesthetic of that room. I don't care one way or the other if this comes back, I just don't want it in that room. Now, I want to get into new features, gameplay, and quality of life features that have not been in any previous release. While many of us would love a one-to-one remaster, I assume that Nintendo wants to price this game at a minimum of $60 physical release. While Ocarina of Time is a masterpiece, it's an older title, and this price range puts in competition with modern titles on the platform. We should also keep in mind that this version of the game needs to also be able to compete with other releases of itself. It's currently available through the Nintendo Classics N64 app on the higher tier of the subscription service. physical copies of the excellent 3DS remaster are still hovering around the initial $40 USD MSRP. Many emulation softwares are available, and the game has been decompiled into a PC build that offers a great number of excellent visual enhancements and quality of life options. If they want to price this game at $60 or higher for physical release, they have to give people an experience they can't easily get through other means. The easiest and most obvious way is to drastically overhaul the very simple geometry in most areas. While model replacements and added higher resolution textures are possible in the PC port, overhauling the geometry of the world itself to feel more organic would offer a different experience that can't easily be gained otherwise. I also think it's totally feasible to remove loading zones between overworld areas to make the world feel more seamless. Assuming they keep the walls and cliffs around each area, they can easily call areas not visible to the player and load them in before they would become visible to save on resources. There are some areas that may still need a loading zone or would otherwise require an overhaul in this theoretical scenario. For example, the shortcut from Lost Woods to Goron City would have to be a very long cave passage if the loading zones would be removed, which would also defeat the point of that being a shortcut. Another feature I think could be beneficial is a tracking system for golden sculptures and tools for finding them. For those of you who are more familiar with the newer games, think of the golden sculptures similar to the Koroks from Breath of the Wild and Tears of the Kingdom. There are 100 of these, and you get a reward for every 10 up until 50. The problem is that a lot of these skulls are very difficult or obtuse to find. Many only appear at nighttime, so you can comb entire areas and still miss one if it's wrong time of day. There are no markers on the map to indicate a location where you got a skull token, and sculptures inside of boxes, trees, or in the ground make no noise until they are revealed. Some kind of item that alerts you to when one is nearby would be helpful, similar to the Korok Mask in Breath of the Wild and Tears of the Kingdom. Most of the sculpture rewards aren't helpful, so they can easily make that an early reward. They could bring back the Sheikah Stones from Ocarina of Time 3D and have hint videos for sculptures, but I think that really interrupts the exploration and gameplay loop. This also ties into another thing they can change with this game, that being the economy. There's almost nothing worth spending rupees on in this game. Shops stock refills for consumable items that you can find easily through normal gameplay. The tunics are very expensive, but you get them for free before you have the option to buy them, and you only lose a tunic if you are eaten by a like and don't kill it right afterwards. The two biggest purchases in this game are intentionally scams, that being the Giant's Knife, which breaks quickly, and the Magic Carpet Salesman, who scams you into buying bombs at an insane price. The entry fee for mini games, which often reward the player with upgrades to consumable capacity, are the best use of rupees, but cost very little each attempt. Collecting all 100 skull tokens gives you infinite money. There's also ways to infinitely farm money in the Lost Woods, but there's nothing to do with all this money in this game. I would suggest that they add a tunic that grants invincibility but drains rupees, similar to an outfit in Twilight Princess and one in Tears of the Kingdom, but we already have a Nehru's Love item that gives you invincibility for as long as you have magic, so it seems kind of redundant. Another way to address this is to add additional side quests to the game that may require spending rupees in some form. Ocarina of Time only has a few of what could generously be called side quests, with the Chaden Sequence and Mask Quest being the only ones that take any amount of time or investment to complete. I'm thinking of something along the lines of the Malomar quest line from Twilight Princess, where you need to donate a lot of money to rebuild a bridge and buy a store. Maybe you could have some kind of fund to build and expand Kakariko, since much of it is under construction while Link is a child, and the more you donate during that child era, the more buildings and NPCs there will be in the future. That could be kind of interesting. On a similar note to adding more quests and expanding on towns, Hyrule Field could use some more content. This is especially needed if loading zones between areas are removed, since Ron Ranch, which is in the middle of a field, is larger on the inside than the outside, requiring the field to be scaled up or the ranch to be scaled down if that were to happen. It does a great job of making you feel like Hyrule Field is an interconnected large place. It gives a great sense of scale, but there really isn't anything to do in Hyrule Field besides a handful of grottos. There aren't even any enemies in it besides the large pose once you get to the latter half of the game. I think one of the reasons why this is due to how Epona works. You can use your bow on horseback, but Link is invincible on Epona, can't use a sword at all. Introducing some kind of horseback combat and enemies designed to be battled on horseback, similar to Chai Princess, would go a long way to flesh out Hyrule Field. Another way to flesh out Hyrule Field is to add traveling NPCs similar to those that can be found occasionally in Breath of the Wild and Tears of the Kingdom. Having a bunch of them in the child era and few to none in the adult era would also help set a more somber tone for that part of the game. With that, I think that's pretty much everything regarding changes to Ocarina of Time on Switch 2 that I wanted to talk about. I don't think there's any need to change the dungeons themselves. Making the boots equipable will fix pretty much any and all pacing issues with them. They could do something similar to Star Fox and Switch 2 where they add additional cutscenes, but I really don't think it's necessary, and I don't think there's many natural places to put them in as Star Fox does, where they can just put them in between levels. Those of you who are more familiar with the history of OOT may be shouting about cut content and content from the canceled disk drive expansion. The Sage Medallions functioned as items in early builds and cast spells, and while that was a cool idea, I don't think reintroducing that mechanic would be super helpful. It's already an easy game, so I don't think giving Link additional firepower in that form is necessary. I feel like adding an additional dungeon for the Light Medallion, which is just handed to the player for free in the game typically, would really harm the pace of the game. And more so than that, I think I prefer to have a Forest Temple, or even the Fire Temple if you stumble into that one first, be the player's first dungeon in the second half of the game, rather than like a light dungeon or something of that kind. I don't think that disk drive expansion content will be included here, because in a way, it's already been released. There's a lot of evidence that suggests that the way the expansion pack would have functioned is through adding remixed auto dungeons and some other odd and end features, such as a tracker for how many steps the player took. Those remixed dungeons were added in Master Quest, so as long as we get that Master Quest here, I think that the core idea of that expansion will continue to live on. If there is a change you want that I didn't mention here, or you disagree with my ideas, feel free to leave a comment, and I'll try to keep on top of replying to them. I understand there are probably a lot of people who don't want any kind of change to this game beyond a visual upgrade, and I understand that sentiment. I just think that you can already get that experience through the PC build, especially, which allows for a lot of customization for what visual or quality of life enhancements you do or do not want. The original game and subsequent re-releases and fan projects are already so good that a best case scenario for this game is for it to be something that not only builds on Ocarina of Time, but also does its own thing in some areas. The most important thing this project should accomplish is making an already incredible experience more attractive and accessible for new players. There's an entire generation of fans now who have only played the new open world titles and don't know about the kind of world, story, and dungeon design that defined this series for decades. These are the casual fans, the kind of people who are not interested in paying for the higher tier Switch Online to play these retro games. We're not interested in investing or collecting retro consoles or games. They don't really have any interest in learning how to use emulators to play these older titles. Many of us older fans want people to have an open mind and enjoy these older games in the series, but being open-minded is also a two-way street. We need to be willing to accept changes to these older games and know that even in a situation where this version fails to meet our own lofty expectations, the game in its original format will be here for all of time.